Good morning, everyone. My name is Francesco Biagi, and I am an associate professor of comparative public law at the University of Bologna, Department of Legal Studies. And today I would like to present my new book, Constitution Building After the Arab Spring, a comparative perspective, that has just been published by Cambridge University Press in January 2025. First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Giuseppe Martinico, Professor Cristina Fasone, and all the other members of the team of Diritti Comparati for giving me the opportunity to present the book. It's a great honor, so thanks a million for that. The book is the result of my activities in the Arab region over the past decade. And indeed, in addition to conducting research and academic projects, I've also provided the training and consultancy, mainly within the framework of the Max Planck Foundation activities, on various projects related to constitution building and the rule of law to governmental and judicial institutions in different Arab countries. So in this volume, I try to combine the theoretical dimension typical of an academic book with a more practical and concrete approach based on my research and consultancy work in the region. In this brief presentation, I will try to answer three questions. Why this book? What is the focus of this book? And what is the purpose of the book? So first of all, why a book on the constitutional transformations that have occurred in the Arab world after the so-called Arab Spring? Well, the first reason is that it is true that scholarly interest has developed significantly after the 2011 uprisings, but overall the Arab region remains very often off the radars. So my book aims to contribute to filling this gap. The second reason has to do with the magnitude of this new wave of constitution building in North Africa and the Middle East. Because in recent years, no regions in the world have witnessed the adoption of such a large number of new constitutions and new constitutional reforms. And interestingly, in some cases, important international actors such as the UN, the Venice Commission also were involved in the constitution-making processes. What is the focus of the book? Well, my book analyzes from a comparative perspective this new generation of Arab constitutions. And it focuses in particular on constitution building, which includes three main components. First of all, the process of constitution drafting. The second, the substantive choices made by the framers that are formalized in the new constitutions. And the third component, the process of constitutional enforcement. So I explore how these constitutions were drafted, what they say, and to what extent they were implemented. And the analysis of these three components represents the core of my book. And I look in particular at 7 countries, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. More specifically, the first chapter examines the post-Arab Spring constitution drafting processes. And it shows that most of these processes were characterized by major flaws, major shortcomings, a fact that not only contributed to weakening the democratic nature of these texts, but also had a negative impact on the legitimacy and sense of ownership of these constitutions, and ultimately on the transition processes as a whole. In my opinion, although it should not be idealized, the process that led to the adoption of the 2014 Tunisian constitution was the only positive exception, because it was characterized by a much stronger democratic spirit. In the second chapter, I discuss the system of government and the distribution of powers under the post-2011 constitutions. And first of all, I examine the issue of the over-concentration of authority in the hands of the head of state, with a partial exception of the 2014 Tunisian constitution, placing a special emphasis, a special focus on the emergency regimes. Moreover, I showed that not only horizontal but also vertical separation of powers has remained weak. And finally, I discussed the main reasons for this overconcentration of authority. And in my opinion, one of the major consequences of this overconcentration of powers was to undermine the principle of popular sovereignty. And indeed, I argue that far from belonging exclusively to the people, sovereignty in the Arab world continues to be held and not only exercised also by other subjects, namely political and sometimes even military leaders. Then the third chapter is devoted to constitutional justice, to constitutional courts. Here I analyze the major changes introduced in this field by the new constitutions, and I also examine the role that constitutional courts and councils played in the transition processes that followed the outbreak of the Arab Spring. And I showed that, with a few exceptions, these bodies displayed a very high degree of deference towards the political authorities, and that they still need to overcome a number of obstacles in order to emerge as effective guarantors of the principles of constitutionalism. Then in chapter 4, I examined the relationship between citizenship and religion, with a particular focus on the status of women and non-Muslims. And I showed that, on the one hand, despite certain improvements, women and non-Muslims are still excluded from full citizenship, which remains a prerogative of male Muslims. On the other hand, however, I stress the fact that recently some prominent religious leaders and institutions, including Al-Azhar, have called for a more equality-based approach towards citizenship rights for all people, irrespective of one's sex and religious belief. And in my opinion, given the profound influence that religion exerts on law and society in Arab countries, these calls might lead to the adoption of legal reforms aimed at reducing discrimination against non-Muslims and women, and that might also represent a first step towards a full and inclusive citizenship. Finally, in the conclusions of the book, I showed the numerous ambiguities, discrepancies, contradictions concerning the role and functions of post-Arab Spring constitutions. But I conclude on a positive note, arguing that the Tunisian constitutional experience between 2011 and 2021, so before the declaration of the state of exception by Kais Saied, shows that the possibility of breaking with the previous tradition of autocratic regimes in the Arab world is not just wishful thinking. And finally, what is the purpose of the book? Well, in general terms, I hope that my book can contribute to a more in-depth understanding of the social, political, constitutional, institutional dynamics in a region that has been historically very difficult to understand. But I also hope that my book can offer some insights, some lessons to those countries that are now experiencing, or that are likely to experience in the future, a process of constitution making after the fall of a dictatorial regime. And I'm thinking, for example, of the case of current Syria, which is now dealing with an extremely complicated constitutional and political transition after Bashar al-Assad was ousted from power in December 2024. So from this point of view, the topic of the book is very timely. Thank you very much for your attention.